All right, everyone. So I'm going to start out with a super simple icebreaker question here. I ask it at all the workshops and things that I do, but it's an extremely important question. So we're going to start out by, what do you prefer, coffee or tea? And I will judge you for your answer, by the way.
I started with coffee.
Vote for coffee.
You can't say
Anybody
that's
else?
a super simple question, Daniel. It isn't a simple question. There's nuance and like it's about time of day. It's absolutely coffee is the first, and then tea is the second. I feel like I have a cup of tea now.
There's some variables involved, yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think for me, for a long time in my life, I used to drink tea all the day. But recently I changed to coffee in the morning and a lot of tea, which is good. I'm happy with this.
I see we all have like coffee lovers in here. That's very interesting. So it depends on the quality of the coffee, I would say. If it's a really good coffee, I'm in. Otherwise, I'll go for tea. How about you, Daniel?
It's true that, bad coffee is very bad. Tea, you're much more likely to get a good cup of tea, except in France. I've got to say, I hate to say it, but the water should be boiling when it is introduced to the tea bag. It's not okay to bring a cup of warm water and a tea bag that's still separate from it. It's a very important thing.
This is really important, a very important next topic. I love it.
The betrayal in Sebastian's eyes that I see there. We're not going to be talking about for a few weeks.
This is why I don't drink tea.
Everyone, Nuxt 4 release is going to be delayed. I'm really sorry. It was my careless comment about French tea.
Next usage in France, straight away down to the bottom. We'll see what's happening.
All right. So let's get on to the more important topics now. And so what are some of the core goals for developer experience in Nuxt 4, and how do these differ from previous versions? And if you just, if there's any preface you want to give about Nuxt 4 and kind of what's coming, of course, feel free to add that on there as well. But who would like to take this question?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. I feel sometimes like a broken record, but then again, there are people who do comment and ask this question again, so which suggests that maybe I'm not saying it clearly enough. But Nuxt 4 in general isn't going to bring vast features. So the features we ship in minor releases, we're moving pretty consistently in terms of our roadmap in improving DX in Nuxt 3. You can expect to see the same kind of improvement in Nuxt 4 and also in Nuxt 3, because we're backporting the same features to Nuxt 3 for a minimum of 6 months after the release of Nuxt 4. It should be a pretty straightforward, continual process. It doesn't differ 4 versus 3. 4 is about thoughtful breaking changes that are going to delight people, at least delight people in the straightforwardness of the migration, I hope. It's not about bringing new DX features. Having said that,
I think that's a super
some
great.
of the features we are shipping in Nuxt 4, I do think will be nice. So one of the breaking changes is a new default directory structure, which I think is going to be a nice developer experience change, because it's going to help make a little bit more intuitive the divide between the Vue app and the Nitro app.
Great. Thank you very much, Daniel. Anybody else want to chime in on this question?
Maybe I would like to add that if you all want to enjoy, for example, the new default directory structure that Daniel mentioned already, and also other breaking changes in the Nuxt part that are already implemented and ready to go, then you can do this already with the latest Nuxt versions, like a few of them already. You can enable something called compatibility version. You can set it to 4, and then you can go through our intensive migration guide, extensive and intensive in terms of like details, and say like, okay, what changed, how to also revert it if you have issues with that, and step by step either enable all the new breaking changes, disable some parts of them, enable them fine-grained, and make sure that your application is already on a good way to go. Or if you build a new application with Nuxt, saying, I have a new project, and start with these straight away by using Nuxt in a -t for the template, and then you can use the v4 compat template to make sure that you start with all of these straight away and don't have to worry about too much migrating when it comes to Nuxt breaking changes.
Awesome. So I see a couple people in the chat talking about the shared folder, and then that some have been using the compatibility version for a few months, and it sounds like everybody's loving it. So that is a good thing. All right. Moving on to the next question then. By the way, I've already noticed this. Maybe not a great idea to put Daniel as the moderator when we also have Daniel the panel on the guy on the panel, so the expert. So if anybody else on the call here, if you do want to address me, maybe you just say DK, just so I'm not confused.
Fair point, DK. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so next question we have is, how does the Nuxt team prioritize community feedback, and how do you envision the community shaping future Nuxt releases?
I think it depends. It definitely depends of the project. Nuxt is split in many repositories. We have the core of Nuxt, which is the Nuxt repository, who Daniel is mainly maintaining with the core team for triaging. Then underlying, we have the Nitro package, and which underneath is the NGS dependencies. And we also have the Nuxt modules who are maintained by different persons. So it definitely depends, I would say, of the repository. I think I can let one of the core team member keep answering on this.
I mean, I would also say that in general, community feedback is super important. So if you have anything that you want to share as in like a pattern that you use and that you feel like you do in every project, maybe how to like make it more, let's say, standardized, or bring that even in as a module, as a core. Like we have a nice Discord where you can come in, like ask for feedback, discuss things, propose solutions, and I think the more people are vocal about what they use, as the patterns, also the bugs, of course, they might see every now and then. If you like report these with minimal reproduction, that helps a lot, of course, to fix these issues, and yeah, to make the framework itself better. So if you encounter something and like can spare a bit of time, that's always helpful. And besides that, of course, we have meetings in the team itself to discuss, for example, issues that we've tried before. It's like, okay, this might be a good thing to bring up to discuss. Is this something that we might see the framework doing? Is this something that could be solved already in user land with like a module, for example, or like some custom code? And then, of course, we discuss all the things that are brought up there.
Yeah, I think Alex mentioned a really important point about the extendability. Because the Nuxt core is really flexible, there are so many cases that immediately we cannot have a solution inside Nuxt, but there's always a module for that. So whenever there is a new thing or there's a new convention or idea, usually the community goes with creating a module that enhances behavior of Nuxt. Even there are some behavior fixes that can be added as modules. And then over the time, we evaluate them. If it's really common enough, just like so many of the features that are in Nuxt 3 right now, we move them from community, like the fetch library. We had so many feedbacks, and also for the authentication, that people wanted something built in. We gathered all these experiences from the feedback, and eventually they found their way back to Nitro or Nuxt or other places. So as I think everyone mentioned, that always please feel free to share that feedbacks. Sometimes they are like an immediate feature, sometimes there is a module, but all the times we always consider them in long plan.
I mean, I think Nuxt is pretty unique in the fact that it is a community project, that it's not being driven by the needs of a particular corporation, or the business case of a particular corporation. So our development and roadmap does come from the community. And I hope people feel that that is the case when they look at releases and see the features that are rolled out. And if you want to make a difference to Nuxt, filing issues and coming up with good ideas and trying out creating modules as proof of concept of what you want to do is a great way to shape where Nuxt goes and what kinds of things you get to use in your projects.
Great. So meeting the needs of the community, can't go wrong with that. Okay, so moving on then. Do we have an official release date for Nuxt 4?
We don't.
That we can share
so
with
Nuxt,
everybody.
well, no. So Nuxt 4, we're pretty much done in terms of the breaking changes on the Nuxt side. So we're waiting for the other dependencies, and we want to make sure we get those right. So I think maybe Pooya might be able to add a few notes on that.
Yes, as Daniel mentioned, most of the things that we want to do in the major versions, they are not. They are actually also exciting features. There are a lot of performance improvements, but most of them are oriented about long-term support and breaking changes. So there is no exact date. And as I mentioned, we are like one of the most what we want is Nitro and H3 releases, which we are evaluating the ecosystem situation, potentially improving the integration with the Vite to be much better, because the time we started Nuxt 3, many things was experimental. We had to reinvent the builds. So this time that we are taking is to make sure that the breaking changes that we make, they are for more long-term support and compatibility. And as much as we can, we are backporting everything to the current miners, both Nuxt and Nitro. They are having features every month. And as soon as we are sure that this is the right path, we start to roll out the version 4 of Nuxt, I would say.
All right. Makes a lot of sense.
Just to double down on what was said before, like you can enjoy most of the breaking changes already. So there's like no reason to like, okay, I have to, I don't know, hold off until this new major version comes out or anything. It's not really necessary. Like just follow the best practices right now. If you have a new project, start with the compatibility template and the compatible versions are like already enabled, and yeah, you're kind of good to go.
Awesome. All right. Next up, what does the roadmap for Nuxt auth utils look like on the road to 1.0? Everybody's pointing at the same person.
Me? Watch my talk tomorrow is the best answer. There are missing pieces that I'm working on. I'm also exploring all the auth solution to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Also working with the community. I have more than 50 contributors on the auth module in less than a year. So it's coming step by step. Authentication is very hard to manage properly. I think Lucia is a good example of how hard it can be to have a proper solution and maintain it. So that's why also NuxtHub is NuxtHub utils and not NuxtHub, because it's impossible to manage all the different auth solution and the different rendering modes, different hosting solution. So I think I'll keep it simple, but the road to 1.0 will have some features such as session storage, and you learn more on my talk tomorrow.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Sebastian. All right. Let's see. Next up, are there any plans to make transitions smoother between major versions? And I think we've talked about this a little already. Like, should be pretty good, right?
I mean, maybe to add, because 3 to 4, we talked a lot about it. 2 to 3 could be, of course, addressed where there are a lot of moving pieces at the same time with like, okay, Vue 2 to Vue 3, Webpack to Vite, possibly, the composition API coming in, ecosystem, and so on and so on. But one thing that helps there is Nuxt Bridge, which you can use. So if you have a Nuxt 2 application, you want to move to Nuxt 3, you can try going to Nuxt Bridge first, enabling features step by step, see what doesn't work or what works. And then gradually migrate eventually to Nuxt 3. So that's, I think, one point that helps transitioning. And also, like, I think that's, especially for bigger applications, a good option to go for.
Great. Any other feedback here?
So the the question is a little bit. So indeed, it's not that there are plans to do this in the future. It's that we have in fact already done this. So if you try out the compatibility version 4, you should see that this is the case. We also have a very detailed upgrade guide. There are code mods for every bit that can be code modded, and everything is granular, so you can try it all and then reverse it. And many of the features are also backwards and forwards compatible. So for example, the new directory structure, if you update to the new version, it will work with your current directory structure because it detects that you're using it. And if you use the new structure, that will also work because it will detect that you're using it. So yes, so this is one of the main things that we're doing in version 4 and something that we have thought a lot about. So ideas welcome. If you try it out and there's anything that is, there's any friction, let me know. I don't want there to be friction.
I imagine that auto detection does cause like a slight little performance hit, but you're really only talking about like during dev time, right? It's nothing that your end user is actually gonna lose from.
It won't. Exactly. We basically check if a file exists on the file system. So, and that's maybe 1 or 2 file system access calls. So it's not much of a performance hit, particularly given that importing a file is going to hit the file system potentially 5-10 times. So it's a very, very minimal overhead.
Makes sense. All right. Will components lands be stable and not experimental for Nuxt 4? Thinking maybe server components here?
Yeah, component islands probably, yeah.
Yep, okay.
So component islands or server components are stable in a sense. You can use them in production. The thing that isn't stable, the thing that is experimental, is the API for how Nuxt Islands is implemented. For example, if you use server pages now, even without enabling any experimental feature, it will just work. So that there are some things that are already enabled. The API is what we're talking about here, because we don't want to have an API that we need to change, and that would force us to Nuxt 5. But I mean, personally, I quite like the current API, and I'm quite happy with it. But,
also to add on that, like it's with a lot of experimental features that this is the case. Like they're not, I don't know, like bleeding edge and like breaking in X scenarios. They're more like, okay, there is an API, or maybe also like an underlying scenario where things are maybe not stabilized yet, and we want to wait breaking changes, so we rather put them behind an experimental flag so we can ensure, okay, there can be updates, also breaking changes in minor versions. Same, for example, for I think type pages. That it brings all the magic of basically the thing Eduardo worked on for the router to make sure, okay, we have really type-safe pages into Nuxt as well. So also there, it works fine in production. You can just use it. It's mainly for TypeScript usage anyway, so IDE has the most out of it in your CI. But it's still marked as experimental just because of underlying changes. And yeah, same idea here.
Great. All right. So next question. Any special plans for Nuxt layers in Nuxt 4? Anything changing with layers in 4, or are we pretty solid there?
We shipped a pretty significant change in a minor version of 3, which is that we now have auto-imported layers in your project. So you can simply have a layers directory, and that will be auto-imported. I don't think anything about layers requires a breaking change. So every feature we plan to build for layers is equally going to be brought to Nuxt 3. So it's not a version 4 related change.
All right.
Layer aliases might be something you can expect to see soon.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Yeah, I would also love to see that, of course. I know lots of people are looking forward to that.
And multi-app support. It's not strictly speaking layer related, but it will probably be very overlapping concerns. And that is something that you can expect to see as well. But again, it's not a version 4 change versus 3. It's tricky when we're talking about it, because so multi-app support, exactly. So there are two kinds of things that we're talking about when we're talking about multi-app support. So one is out of the box module federation. So being able to do generic module federation. That is nothing to do with Nuxt specifically. That's everything to do with just having it's module loading basically across multiple builds. So how do you share some code? So if you have Vue, for example, is it possible to have in the same page multiple builds of a website built at different times, but still sharing the same version of Vue, the same code? So it prevents overloading code. You have 10 different instances of Vue across on a page that combines apps. And so that's a good target. But we also have the idea of a Nuxt application that is able to host different bits of an app. So imagine for a moment you have a Nuxt app that's running, but then you dynamically import a new route into that page. And that new route comes from a different build, a different monorepo, or a different repository or deploy controlled by a different team. And that route is able to share the Nuxt instance and the Nuxt hooks and the Nuxt composables across these two builds without needing to duplicate or have a separate instance, like a separate Nuxt app. And that is going to be a really nice thing, I think, for bigger teams who want to deploy separately. At the moment, layers are a great solution for this. They just mean you have a single deploy that pulls in all of the apps at the same time. So it's the same kind of eventual outcome. It's just a slight difference in how the CI/CD works. But yes, this is coming.
Also, some people in chat mentioned micro frontends, so in a way that's like let's say, the Nuxt version of micro frontends.
Excellent. Yeah, sounds like a great feature add for larger teams for sure. All right, next up. Whoops, the page shifted on me here. That's not the one I wanted to ask. I'm really curious about this one. Is there a plan to introduce type safety for query and body for $fetch and use fetch?
Yes, there is. I think Pooya would be a great person to hear from on this. I am also working hard on it, and this is a thing that we all would very much love to see.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right, so definitely on the radar, work in progress. Are there any issues someone could go and follow to see progress on that, or PRs or anything?
There is.
Indeed, there are. So
excellent.
Go ahead. I'll just push in the chat. Oh yeah.
Excellent. All right. So get more information from that.
We want to get this in the right location. So there's lots of places in the tech stack where you can implement this. So there's Nuxt, for example. There's Nitro, and Nitro is what handles the typed data. But there's a Nuxt integration as well when you think about stuff like use fetch. There's also ofetch, which is the underlying library that provides a lot of these things. And so it's possible to solve this at many different levels, but we want to solve it at the right place. So we want to solve it as low down as possible, and actually maybe even unlock some other typed features that we haven't publicly talked about. So
exciting.
Of course, if you have your API Nitro, then you can use the open API integration, then generate your own client and so on. So if you want to have that kind of type safety for, let's say, query already now, if that's the most desirable outcome, but of course, we're working on something, especially Daniel and Pooya, that's also not necessarily tied to open API.
All right. Next up, let me see. I had a really great one that was related, very much so related to that. Let me see if I can find it here. Here we go. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on using TanStack query in a Nuxt app versus using use async data or use fetch?
I can quickly answer. I don't use TanStack query. I believe it's a great library, but I've been discussing and hacking a lot with Eduardo on the Attendee demo, and I think Eduardo will be talking about this tomorrow. Pina Colada, which is based on Pina, and it's similar to TanStack query, is used on this template, and so we improved the Nuxt module and the plugin. So I'm quite happy about this, and it opens the optimistic update and caching validation. I think it has a nice future, but it's good as it's a module right now, so people can play, give us feedback before we think of having a core feature in Nuxt.
Makes sense. All right.
To-
Any other input on this question?
Sure. Like to add on that, I use TanStack query, like Vue query, in projects. It's also like I can just agree and double down what Sebastian said. It's a really good library. I'm very happy to see lots of framework agnostic libraries with their own adapters for the framework being around. I'm really glad to see that in the general web ecosystem. And I think especially if you need like a very complex data fetching mechanisms with, of course, like caching and like handling server state, so not state management as with Pina. Then TanStack query is a good choice. Pina Colada, as Sebastian mentioned, has a very similar API actually. So if you're using, for example, like all the Vue goodies anyway, in order to stay into the Vue ecosystem and have a tighter integration, then it's definitely something worth checking. Plus, Eduardo is hacking around hard on that. So I'm really curious what other things that will unlock for the Vue ecosystem as well and how that will fit in.
Awesome. You don't happen to have any tutorials on using TanStack with Nuxt, do you, Alex? Alex has really great tutorials, by the way, y'all. It's top
Thanks.
stuff.
It's actually on my list. It's not super high list because there are other things like Pina Colada, for example, and data loaders to cover first. But actually, that might come still this year. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Next up, we've got, do you plan any new updates or features for Nuxt test utils?
So I think one of the big things for me is that we will have server environment testing. So be able to test Nitro endpoints. That's not specifically Nuxt test utils related. There might be a way to implement this in a way which is more shared across Nitro frameworks. But yes, that's that's my personal biggest need to implement. Also, I would say for Nuxt test utils, if you're hacking away at something and there's a problem, please submit a PR. It's a very quick way to fix something, and I really appreciate everybody who's done so.
Or an issue with like, hey, this is the problem. I know how to send a PR to solve it, but this is what I'm hitting. Also helps. Definitely.
All right. Does Nuxt Content 3 come with Nuxt 4? And are there any plans or updates concerning Nuxt content?
So I think I already answered on the chat. I definitely recommend you to watch Ahad's talk tomorrow. We've been working the past weeks on making sure Nuxt Content v3 is working in all different environments. We actually use it on the Nuxt UI v3 documentation, and it's working well so far. We've also testing on the new Nuxt documentation, also the Content v3 documentation that I've been updating like an hour ago. So expect some news regarding Content v3 tomorrow.
Awesome.
End of spoiler.
All right. So going back to data just a little bit, can Pina Colada be a new default instead of use fetch in Nuxt?
No.
So I think the thing is we so useFetch does a particular thing. So it fetches from an endpoint in your own API. So we're always going to need that, whether or not you're using Pina Colada. So it's almost comparing apples and oranges here. So useFetch isn't going away, but Pina Colada can come and play. That would be great as well.
Makes a lot of sense. All right. Any plans to fold Nuxt SEO into Core Nuxt? And first, maybe for those who don't know, what is Nuxt SEO?
Yeah, so Nuxt SEO. Oh,
go
Sebastian,
ahead,
go ahead. You go.
Nuxt SEO is a Nuxt module done by Harlan, who has many different features for a project. And like we always do at Nuxt, you always have a module depending on your needs. When working on the SEO module, we also add the use SEO meta composable in Nuxt, and we honestly moving step by step to know what is very important or required and should be part of the Nuxt core, and what could be added as an extension. So I would say, for my personal opinion, not in a very near future, but some part could be slowly added and part of Nuxt core, but depends. This is something we will discuss with the core team.
In general, we take the pattern of adding core utilities that can then be extended by modules. So, and I think we're very happy to think of what those core utilities would be, rather than adding entire modules. It's worth saying Nuxt SEO is it's not a core module. It's maintained by Harlan, who does it very well, by the way. And we have been talking as a team about what bits can usefully be abstracted in a way which isn't entirely specific to those particular set of modules that he maintains there, so that other module authors could use them. And it's a very tricky thing, because you're thinking about things like, how do you set a site name? And because you need the base URL of a website, and it's needed in lots of cases and lots of different modules. So you'll need it for OG images, for example, and you'll need it maybe for, it also needs maybe to integrate with internationalization. So you might have a different domain for a different language. And there can be other complexities there. So this is a very tricky thing, particularly when you're thinking of making something that's going to be generic and work for everyone. It's always the case, right? So doing something is a lot easier than abstracting it into a useful API that's going to work for all use cases, which one of the reasons why Nuxt Auth is authentication is a much more straightforward thing to implement for your app than it is to create a library that will implement authentication for every possible use case. So yeah, a few additional thoughts perhaps.
And in addition, I mean, not every application is a public-facing application that needs something with regards to SEO. So also like fully including everything in the core wouldn't be really useful. Plus all the amazing modules, like I used a lot of them myself for OG image generation on the fly, for example. Yeah, everything which is related to SEO is, I think, first of all, a good spot to use. And I agree with Sebastian Daniel here, like step-by-step seeing what is worth abstracting in a way, and that's also useful for other modules. To have a unified way of dealing with that is definitely something that's desirable, but yeah, it takes time and work and figuring out the right way, not making more breaking changes than necessary as well.
Awesome. All right, next up. When will Next UI Pro with Radix UI support be released?
Yeah, it's already released in alpha in version 3, like a UI version 3 alpha. So if you have access to the Next UI Pro repository, if you purchase a license, you should be able to use the alpha version. We also moved from V1 to V3, so it matched the Next UI version. But yeah, it's already in progress. The Next UI V3 documentation is using Next UI Pro V3. and using Radix UI. Actually, Radix Vue is going to be renamed Reka UI, so it's also migrating to Reka UI. But yeah, it's in the work.
Awesome.
Also,
All
still
right.
Payment v4 is not out yet, which is another thing to wait on.
Yeah.
So these are the two, let's say, bottlenecks right now.
For instance, Benjamin saw all the changes in Tailwind that happened yesterday, and it's taking 2 days to migrate to the new alpha of Tailwind. But if you are living on the edge, definitely try the alpha. It's worth it.
Yeah, also with new project, like, hey, I just want to try it out, go for it, exactly. And give us feedback. Always wanted, always desired.
Great. All right. Next question is, when is Nitro version 3 being released?
So yeah, I think it's close to the same story of Nuxt version 4 because that's one of the major blockers for Nuxt version 4 as well. And if you followed my previous talks, I mentioned that one of the biggest things that we are doing in Nuxt version 3 and H3, also the HTTP library behind it, version 2, is that we are fully moving to the web native API. And it's a huge change because we have to make sure the ecosystem is compatible, but also we have to rewrite major parts of internal Nitro. For example, the caching layer has to be completely rewritten right now to be ready for that. I hope in next 2 or 3 months, like we are fully stable, but for sure before that we start beta releases soon because we are prepared after the caching layer changes. Really, I can't promise, but we are really trying hard to make it possible soon.
Great. All right. What does the future of Nuxt Studio look like? Will we be seeing support for GitLab or other platforms?
We are first adding support for Content v3, which is quite important. The Studio module will be an extension of the Content module. If I spoil a little bit, the Content module, you will be able to define content collections and define the schema about the from matter. So you will have validation and a built-in validation. And at the same time, it will also offer much better editing experience as we will know the front matter, either of your YAML file or Markdown file. So it will be a much better non-technical editing experience. And of course, GitLab is up next, the branch edition. I'm sorry for the GitLab users. You have to be a bit patient.
All right. Will lazy hydration enabled by Vue 3.5 be available for Nuxt version 4?
I mean, you can already use it, right? It's the Vue feature. You can use the latest Vue version. So if you want that low-level API, you can start with define async components up and going. But it's also pending PR, putting a link in chat right now as well, that will enable that. But they can also talk a bit more about that, I think.
So absolutely, as Alex said, we'll ship that in a minor if we can before Nuxt 4. It's not a breaking change. Basically, anything that isn't a breaking change isn't a Nuxt 4 thing. So if we can ship something, we will ship it. We're not going to artificially hold things back to make a bigger release for Nuxt 4. I'm not particularly about hype, so we'll keep things coming. And lazy hydration is a really key feature, which is one reason why it's not been merged yet, because you want to make sure that the API we have is the right API, and as much as possible is everything is being done at build time, so that you don't get, because one of the main reasons you might use lazy hydration is in order to have a more performant website, and so we want to do all of that processing at build time, and therefore we need a really good API and really solid implementation. Do check out the PR. It's a lot of hard work has gone into it so far, and it will be really nice to see it out.
Great. Looking forward to that. Next question is, What about running Nuxt in the edge, AWS Edge, Lambda, Vercel Edge function, Cloudflare workers? Yeah, what's going on in Edgeland?
I mean, it's already working for a while now, so I highly recommend you to try it out. Thanks to Nitro preset, definitely you can deploy to Vercel Edge, Cloudflare workers, Cloudflare pages, Netlify Edge, Dino deploy, and other edge platform that I'm not aware of. It's possible. There are some drawbacks, of course. So if you use some Node.js dependency, hardcore Node.js dependency, if you want to use the file system, even though Nitro with the unenv library mock a lot of them, it can happen that the Edge runtime doesn't support such dependencies. But it's like 6 years ago when you had a Vue library that were not compatible with SSR. We can see now more and more a library compatible with the Edge runtime. So it's becoming an enjoyable experience to deploy on the Edge, and also quite cheap. So I highly recommend.
Also, to add on the dependency part, that's also not something specific to Nitro or Nuxt that like would happen if you would deploy any kind of application on Edge. Actually, with Nitro and unenv, as Sebastian mentioned, will be even like easier to get some things running that might depend on like some node specific things, because they're mocked out or there are replacements for that. So that's definitely a good thing, and also used throughout not only Nuxt ecosystem, of course, and Nitro.
My own curiosity question here, and in terms of like doing database interactions on the Edge, is there something that you recommend using?
I mean, in general, you should be very thoughtful in any setup to optimize your rendering loop. So what do you need? What kind of data do you need in order to render? And how costly is that getting that data going to be? So by far the biggest slowdown in terms of returning a response from a server is data fetching, particularly when people set things up to do it in a waterfall style method. Sometimes they don't need to, but people just sequentially write, await this, await that, await this next thing. Because it's fine, it works in dev, and it will triple, quadruple the time for your server response. And moving something to the edge isn't going to fix that. So the first thing is optimize that. There are things, obviously, it's important for you to have. There are a couple of helpful visualizations, but where your edge server is located, where your database is located, matters. If the edge server takes as long to get data from your database, it might not matter that it's closer to your user, unless you have a way to cache that data in the edge server. So there are a lot, and if you do have a good way of caching the data, it doesn't change very much, then it probably doesn't matter where your database server is located, because you can end up having sort of millisecond responses if it's cached locally in your edge runtime. Cloudflare has great solutions for that, for example, and they also have a promise of co-locating your database server with your runtime. So there's some useful stuff. I think Sebastian could comment on that. And other providers have similar things. But by far the best generic solution is just to answer the question of caching. So if you are performing requests to a database server, you can use storage within Nitro to cache the data, give it a time to live or something like that, and then just serve the cached data. You can even create a little endpoint within your server that has defined cache event handler or something like that to simplify the DX on your own part and just fetch the data from that. And you'll find that solves the issue of where your database is located. If you always need up-to-date data, then you need to start looking at and thinking about geography. Once you've done some testing, what is the actual time it takes to get from the HTTP request from your database to your the furthest edge location? Because sometimes it's even a lot less than you think, and it's not a big deal. But you should be using real metrics to make the decision.
That's interesting. And even like considering KV storage, and maybe there's some things you could store right there on the edge, without even having it, without having to have that relational DB. Interesting. I'm for my own development purposes, I'm thinking through some of this as you speak, Daniel. So thank you very much for that.
Definitely try it out. Like, it works so smooth, especially with Nitro and unstorage under the hood. It's real joy, no matter which KV store, which Edge platform. That's a big benefit there too.
It reminds me when talking about the waterfall that we will be working on a new tab for the DevTools to be able to know the waterfall or the async data call being done during server-side rendering. So also helping you to improve the performance.
Yes, and on other side, we are integrating with OpenTelemetry. So in extent to what Sebastian mentioned, we are going to make it like inspecting every step, everything that can take some time, and we can inspect it precisely.
Wow. Sounds like it's going to be super helpful. NuxtHub tools are amazing, by the way. Just got to throw that out there. All right. Anything else on this question? Great. I think we have about 5 minutes left, so time for just a few more questions here. And I am trying to pick out the best one. Let's go with this. Any news on NuxtHub, and when are the new internal modules coming out?
We are currently in the process of migrating to Cloudflare Workers, because right now we deploy on Cloudflare Pages, and Cloudflare Pages is missing some features, in my opinion, some important features, such as cron, queues, and durable objects, which are where the fun begins when we can add real-time data. So since the last developer week of Cloudflare, they finally released static asset support for Cloudflare Workers without charge. So we are now migrating the deployment to Workers. And thanks to the work done by Pooya on the preset, it helped us a lot. And since they don't have the same CI, we're also working on the GitHub app and GitHub action and GitLab action. So you can quickly install the NuxtHub app and you will have the automated deployment. Once this is good, we'll be able to build upon this. So once we add the cron, queues, and durable object, the next step will be to add a business feature module, such as authentication and anything you can imagine of that can build upon database, KV, and everything. So I would say early next year, you can expect a prototype of NuxtHub Auth. That's the best I can do.
Yes, and something to add to the cool thing is that we are working on so many different layers from so low level like Andreas and Nuxt and NuxtHub, but we are really trying to make them fit together. Like every feature that Sebastian is mentioning, like the caching is the same thing that Alex mentioned. So if you use it in higher levels like NuxtHub, you already have a cache storage configured for you. Although you have a database that's configured to use durable objects. And they're all working together. I think it's really exciting that we can make it possible.
All right. So next question, I'm being told here we got time for just about 2 or 3 more. So I think I'm going to get this one in because I think it's an interesting question to be honest about. Do you see any reason you shouldn't use Nuxt on a particular project? So are there any limitations of Nuxt that you think you should pick up another tool instead?
If you need to use React,
and switch to Vue, of course, obviously.
You have no choice and you need to use React. Maybe Next won't be the best tool for the job.
Yeah, I think besides that, the typical like progressive enhancement, if like you have an application rendered by Laravel, Django, whatsoever, and then this application is rendering your site, and you just want to add something to get, I don't know, modal working or some reactivity here and there, a little bit of sparkles of front end, then yeah, Nuxt won't work because it will render your whole application, obviously. So either you decide, okay, then Laravel's my only API and Nuxt is rendering everything, or you go for something like Petite Vue or Vue.js itself, depending on the application, right? Or Inertia.js to have a better integration with your, let's say, more SSR, like traditional SSR-centered application. Let's say like Laravel, Django, Rails, and so on and so on.
That's a really, really good reason. You might also find that you're building something like a native app. And I mean a native one. So anything which is still built in web technologies, you can use Nuxt with Tauri or Electron. But if you're building an actual native app that renders to native widgets, you might also not want to use Nuxt in that case. But for any other case, the concept of Nuxt is very much that it can be as minimal as you want it to be. So it should never be a negative to use Nuxt compared to just a pure Vue CLI app. So if you find that you think you have a use case for it and you think, okay, I don't need Nuxt, I don't want to use Nuxt, please let me know. Because if there is such a case and you think there's some savings or a better experience you can get without Nuxt, I want to make sure Nuxt can offer that as well. Because everything is sort of opt-in and features are unpacked when you need them. So you should be able to have the basic minimal Nuxt app doesn't have Vue router. If you just install Nuxt and you don't have a pages directory, it is just Vue. So you should be able to benefit from all the Nuxt DX without having any cost. So let me know if you think that that's not the case, because I would love to see a situation where Nuxt is the wrong choice.
Makes a lot of sense. And there's so much you can do with Nuxt, and then you can do it in the language you love, like Vue. So why not just do it, right? That's kind of my my viewpoint a lot of times.
And you can also use it with any API you want, right? Like you're not necessarily forced to write your API in JavaScript and TypeScript with Nitro. Of course, it's a very nice way to have everything in one application. But if you have a big, Java backend, then you can consume it like in any normal application as well. Or say I have some kind of backend for front end with Nitro and wrap that. So even to say like, oh yeah, my API is not in JavaScript or TypeScript, or it's in whole other applications, of course, fine. Just you can go ahead and query that. That's great.
Awesome. All right. We'll do two more. So second to the last one here, would it be possible to make middlewares in H3 Nitro per route rather than global by default?
So yeah, that's a popular question. In H3 version 1, the current version, it is possible. It's not so straightforward. You have to add a condition in the middleware to filter out based on the route. I know there is a community effort also for that. In H3 version 2, there is a huge change in the router. We basically wrote it from scratch. And actually, we support routable middlewares. This is not something I would suggest to use, but in next major version, it would be possible with a little bit performance overhead, because we need to run the router against the middleware again. But it would be possible to do that natively also.
Awesome. Great to hear. Anybody else? Anything further on that? While I'm trying to pick like the perfect last question, and it's taken me just a moment. Anybody have or really anything else you want to share before you run out of stage time here at Nuxt Nation? I know a lot of you probably do have talks as well. But yeah, any closing remarks from any of you?
Maybe like a few words. First of all, everybody, thanks for watching, listening to the panel. It's so nice to see that many people in the chat interested in the future of Nuxt and what's working out, features, everything basically. And also thanks to everybody like giving a talk, emceeing, while organizing the conference, because that's the place to get info about the future of Nuxt. So yeah, thanks to everyone involved.
Awesome. All right. Y'all, I don't think there is a best question. I feel so bad. Like there's still so many questions left in the queue, and I can't pick just one. So we are going to end here, but I do just want to say thank you all for being on here together. This is great.
I snuck on stage early so I could say hi to everyone.
Hey.
This is lovely to see all of you. Thank you all, and thank you, Daniel. You're a great host. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, DK.